flowed, we returned to the story of Caius, who is currently in the Tyranny Tower, but will be doing more of his fine courier work alongside being the Eternal Champion, Spellsword Dunmer, all-around hero of 2 games now.
Medora, the former court sorceress of Daggerfall, has sent me to Shadowgent in the Rothgarian Mountains. Shadowgent is home to Nulfaga, mother of Lysandus. There I must retrieve the horn of the Great Unicorn. If Nulfaga is unable to help, I must search her castle, Shadowgent, for the horn myself. I have 87 days to return to Direni Tower.
And this will probably be a bit of a struggle to get done on time. Now, if memory serves, I can't remember if I teleported on my way. We'll see if I can find the entrance. Oh, that's right. Yeah, well, this has an easy answer. As much as I don't like using those kinds of cheats, I really don't want to have to do all of that wandering. Okay, now before we go, as always, we will... No spell points. Now, we have been here before. I don't know whether or not it will be repopulated. But we should be able to find Nulfaga at the very least. And I don't remember how to get here, so... There is a side of me that's slightly curious if I can get away with, Nope, I don't have the mana. That was unexpected, to say the least. Well, I can try my open. I might perish for trying my open. Worth a try. memory serves, there was like a really straightforward way of getting behind that door, but unfortunately I don't remember it that well. So one thing I would like to try and do where I can, is always make sure that I'm heading back to this area. I'm just trying to think of the best way to try and get into that throne room. Ah. Again, where I can, I try to prioritize money over goods. have been nice if it kept the map from the last time that we were here. Oh no. Why? Oh no. These things always drive me nuts. We'll work with what we have first. Harmless. Whenever I see levers, I almost always know that I'm gonna wind up skipping ahead just because whenever they give you a puzzle like this, it is just far more trouble than it's worth. I actually think this was the first area. I might have used a teleport on. And it's mostly just because it doesn't really feel like you get a lot of feedback in terms of what the different items do. Otherwise, it'd be a little bit more okay with the levers. It's very likely one of these cases where the levers did something. pretend the ashes I picked up were the ashes of the guy that I just beat. Now I kind of get the feeling that these guys are going to be more trouble than they're worth. Alright, so let's get back on track to try and find Nilfaga or the unicorn horn. Oh god. Spell reflection's pretty cool. The only drawback is that I did have a natural sort of resting point to try and get my levels up. The fact that I'm absorbing so much magicka from the enemy's failed casting attempts means that I'm probably progressing a little bit slower than what I would normally want. But that's fine, because honestly, the sooner I'm done this quest, the happier I'll be. Picking up a unicorn horn from a dungeon I've already been in is not exactly the most gripping quest that I've ever been given. Oh, Christ. Just want to make sure that I'm not missing out on any debuffs that they might have given me. Damn it. I think it'd been a while since I saved. Oh yeah, alright, well. I'll be honest with you, there's a side of me that just kind of wants to skip ahead. I'll try to resist the urge, but just does damage. Maybe it's supposed to be some kind of a trap or something. Alright, so I'm fairly certain I've been through all of these, but let's excuse me. As before, the proliferation of levers is probably the thing that's gonna make me more inclined to teleport than anything else. But seeing as there are still paths for me to go down, I'm trying to resist that urge. Sadly, that is not a unicorn horn. Obviously, all attempts to try and find some path that would take me directly into the Nilfgaard's throne room have been abandoned. I don't know if there's anything new that I can do here. Alright, I'm sorry to do this. but what I'll do in these cases are I'll follow the path in the new area as far as I can. Ah, yes. So one of these teleports me to the top. One of these damages me. Most of these damage me. Yeah, in this case, what I'm going to do is just take the opportunity to explore the new areas, and then as soon as I wind up in a spot that I've already been, then I can just go to the next one. And looks like I'm already there. Alright, well, this is Nilfaga's throne room.
United thoughts and counsels equal hope and hazard in once glorious enterprise. Joined with me once, now misery hath joined in equal ruin. Eternal, eternal, eternal ruin. O my child, why wouldst thou not listen? Thy ear, thy glorious mortal face, thy throat and the arrow. O misery.
I'm thinking this means she doesn't want to help. Oh, you know what? It might have been the case that I opened the door.
Command me, and entry shall be yours.
I was just thinking it might have been I actually opened that door with one of the levers, but apparently that's not the case. So I might have wound up closing one of those gates by pulling the lever. This is, of course, the point where I see if I was just being impatient or there really was no way for me to get to that area. How interesting. So this is the place where we died, so it's not likely. I mean, it's possible, but because we were here at some point, it's possible that given enough time we would have ran into the throne room. obviously I died to that guy last time, so. I seem to remember there was one map, it might have even been this one, where at the edge of like, you know how it's sort of this maze of little blocks. In the center of it, there was a hidden door, which was where the objective was. And I'm almost wondering if it's the same case here. One way or the other, there's really, so far as I can tell, no indication about where this horn is supposed to be, so if we didn't have this cheat, it would essentially mean wandering all of these hallways until we trip over a unicorn horn. It's one of those things where, while I have a lot of respect for what this game did, and there are some things about it that I think are really effective. The design of the dungeons, just the whole process of stumbling through and hoping you run into the objective is a big damper on the experience. All right. Why wouldn't you take the unicorn horn in bed? Oh, jeez. Okay. How heavy is this unicorn horn? Like any good scholar, I'm going to drink all of the potions. Small consolation. Alright. It's not that much for me to give off, but apparently I am also due to read King Edward at some point. So as is tradition, I'm just going to double check where I'm at with all of the books. So I believe we're on volume 4. Alright, let's get some of these done just so it won't take up as much space in my inventory anymore.
King Edward Part 3. Part 3. Chapter 3, Lessons. The golden days passed swiftly. Edward spent most of his time in the company of his parents. He saw few other children. None at all lived in their tree. Only their wood elf host and Morland's 6 companions, an oddly assorted, cheerful lot. Disrespectful, Edward thought. None of the Daggerfall court or servants would have dared have addressed his father as these did Morland and Illyria with their constant raillery.
I'm not sure what that means.
But these weren't servants or courtiers, just companions. Only one was a dark elf. There was a Khajiit woman, brother and sister, a Nordic man, even bigger than Morland, and a lizard-like man who spoke with such a hissing accent that Edward couldn't understand him at all. The Nord man was called the Slave of Morland, or just Slave for short, although Morland usually called him Mats of my slave. Mats tended the group's weapons and gathered wood for the evening fire. Others to bring wood. Morland himself often borrowed Mats' axe and fetched something and split wood if there was need, or if he just felt like it. They spent much of their time roaming the woods and the fields, hunting and gathering produce in 2s and 3s. Usually Morland, Illyria, and Edward and Shade went off together. They carried bows for hunting. When Edward asked Morland to teach him to shoot better, he was told to ask his mother, as she was the better shot. And it was Illyria's arrow that brought down a handsome buck, although both arrows had struck, and they quarreled over whose arrow had killed. I'm
sure this is on the wiki. It's taking too long to load.
Morland exclaimed as he pulled back a fletched arrow from the hindquarters. I don't know how you managed to... What's the point of including text if you're going to do this? Before I married you, you had the companions. Aye, Mats. Matt Smith and I starved together before we met Beech and Willow. Morland pulled out his black dagger, Tooth, and began to skin the animal's body, calling Edward to come and watch. You want to learn about animals, don't you? Live ones, Edward said with distaste. His dainty mother was ripping the skin away with enthusiasm. Such make tough eating, the dark elf said. Give me your cloak. I'll make a package for you to carry. I'm a prince, not a pack horse. You'll carry your share, or you'll be a hungry prince this night. I won't. I don't want any. You can't make me. Morland stood erect and appeared to think this over. Can't I? He taunted. Edward, please, Illyria appealed to him. Tell me, Lord Plince, how then does one get the meat to one's table if one may not carry it? If princes may not carry the meat, then certainly kings and queens may not. Or do princes grow out of the incapacity when they become kings? They have servants. Serve ants? What a clever idea. Only a human could think of that. Ants are excellent at carrying. I have noted, although I have not the trick of commanding them. Perhaps you can teach me. Servants, like Mats here, Edward shouted. He hated being teased. Mats and the other companions had come up, having heard shouts over the kill. Mats, you think I cannot make you carry deer meat, yet I could command Mats to do so. Moreland stared at the blond giant. Well, one never knows until one tries. Mats, carry the deer. The blond scratched his head and jaw thoughtfully. Highness, nothing would please me more, but it is a large deer, and my old wound is troubling my back. Perhaps if you kill a smaller one. Well, Prince, what now? You beat him. At what? I can outrun him. Mats, if I reach that oak first, will you carry the deer? Mats shook his head slowly. You beat him with a stick, Edward yelled. What promise you show as a healer, my prince. You'll have to forgive me if I refrain from consulting you until you have further training. It is my judgment that beating with a stick will not improve Mats's back. Of course, I may be in error. Silk, you carry the deer. Me, my lord. I'm sorry, but I have just remembered that I am fourth cousin of the 5th house of Debella, Queen of Heaven. My dignity forbids that I carry anything at all. Willow and Beach claimed that a mage had forbidden either of them to be carrying any part of the animal while the moon Joan was risen. Prince, are you truly certain about this rule? It seems to make life most inconvenient. We could bring the wood to the deer, which will take many hours and leave us benighted here. We could consume the meat raw on the spot, but I own my belly is not yet empty enough to make that option attractive. Illyria, can you help us? How do the High Rock folk get meat to the table? My lord, when I lived there, it was my firm belief that it appeared by magic. There were servants, but they were something worth. Edward, my son, is it possible that this rule applies only in High Rock? I suppose so. Edward carried a share of the meat that bent his back, but he did not complain, and so it was settled, and the meal that night was a merry one. But for several days after, if the companions caught him carrying anything at all, they would inquire anxiously as to whether a High Rock prince might do so. If Mats is not a servant, then why do they call him Moreland's slave? Edward asked in one drowsy afternoon. Well, he is my slave. I paid gold for him, and all that myth and I had. We came upon a man beating him near Reich Parthkeep. Something man said Mats was a runaway slave, and he'd do as he liked with presumably with him. So I threw down the gold and told him that he could take it and leave, else I would kill him out of hand. He chose the latter, so I told Mats to take the gold as his master's heir and go where, been with us since. Could he leave if he wanted to? Of course. May I go and pick some of those berries over there? Edward asked, and Moreland nodded. Illyria was sleeping curled on her side. Moreland sat next to her, leaning his back against a tree, his hand playing with her long dark curls. His eyes and skin were sensitive to the bright sun. Shade slept stretched in the sun nearby, his dark fur glinting with silver in the light. Edward wandered over to the bushes and picked the bright glowberries, so called because they glowed at night, although right now they were rather dull gray. But they tasted very good. If he ate enough, he would glow at night. Would he glow at night, he wondered? Or if he smashed the juice, presumably he's not smashing the juice. The bushes caught at him. Then he found a sort of tunnel through them and trotted along it, wondering where it led. It ended in a small clearing before a pile of rocks. There was a hole and something in it. Edward stepped back, making a small noise in his throat. The something heaved and presented a tusky, snarling face and hooves that pawed at the earth. The boy backed away slowly. The beast's head went down. The something heaved and immense bulk lumbered into a charge. Edward tried to throw himself into the bushes. There was no room, and incredibly, Moreland was in front of him, between him and the beast. Crash, and the elf seemed to leap backwards for several feet, landing crouched just in front of Edward's face. The air whistled as his blade seemed to jump out of the sheath of its own accord. There was a sparkle in the air around him, and... "Get out of here, boy, now!" Edward fled, yelling for his mother, who was running towards the something to her and began shouting for Moreland. instead. There was no answer then. Somehow the elf was there, unharmed, his blade sheathed. Did you kill it? Are you hurt? No and no. I was shielded. Barely. You disturbed a sow in her den with her litter. Fortunately, she thought she'd had enough after the first impact. I dare say she's unaccustomed to finding her enemies still standing afterwards. Why didn't you kill her? Edward demanded, feeling bloodthirsty after the fright. A katana, even the ebony blade, is not a weapon. I'd choose something after the first... The longer the better. Besides, if we leave her be, there'll be 6 pigs next year, with luck. You made a magic shield, Edward said, wide-eyed. Aye, barring the shield, she'd have left a few marks, even on a tough old dark elf. Edward, it would be gracious to thank your rescuer, his mother... something. Thank you, Edward said automatically, his mind busy with more questions. How had the elf known of his danger? How did he something so quickly? There's scarcely a need to thank me for saving my son's life. Thanks, Shade, Moreland said. The cat told me there was trouble. Edward knelt and hugged the smug purring cat. Good old Shade, I can always count on him. My son, our son, the words rang proudly out at the least excuse. Edward puzzled over this for a while. It wanted presumably an explanation. Favored that Moreland simply didn't know him very well yet, and he was prone to give the benefit of the doubt to strangers. Eventually, but in the meantime, he might as well enjoy it. It was nice, having a father that was proud of you, that liked being with you, took you places, talked to you, listened to you, and most remarkably of all, let you something composing a ballad. Edward told Beech and Willow about the mother pig. I ran when he told me to. Would you? Because he said to. I couldn't think. Willow and Beech listened carefully, exchanged glances, and said they'd think about the problem. After summer around the evening fire, Willow took up her small harp and began to sing about the joys of an autumn afternoon and berries, except that Moreland sent the boy off to pick berries. They'd got that part wrong. Moreland sat up sharply and looked around, but the others had blank darkness and Willow wasn't looking at him. Myth strolled into the firelight, taking mincing steps, picking pantomime berries and eating them noisily. Moreland put his head down and groaned. Myth pantomimed, finding something lurched in the firelight. Myth reached a hand to pat him, then leapt back with a squeal as Mats tried to rip him with a tusk. Huge tusks and a pig nose adored his face, and Myth crouched, hands to his face in exaggerated horror, and Silk, clad in black, leaped between Myth and Mats with a shower of something hose about its knees, shoeless. It reached for its sword, but Mats charged and knocked it flying. It spun out of sight. Mats, scrambling on all fours, missed Myth, but tore his hose. Myth scampered about the fire with Mats after him, Silk's sword in one hand, the other tugging at the hose, chased after Mats, beating him with the sword. Another figure appeared, clad in Lyria's blue gown with Beech's head sticking out above, wearing a long dark wig. Myth cowered behind her skirts. She glared at Mats as he froze. Silk tripped and sprawled behind him. Beech tossed his hair back, patted Myth reassuring on the head, wet one finger, and something bow aimed and twanged. Mats leaped backward, collapsing on top of Silk with a very realistic death rattle. Beech and Myth embraced, ignoring Silk, still flat behind Mats. Moreland had begun laughing when Silk first leaped out. This is not good. Illyria had waited... That doesn't even make sense. Illyria had waited for Beech's appearance. Now tears were running down her cheeks. Moreland was doubled over, pounding a tree. Ripples and giggles of silvery laughter sounded all around, fell into a circle. The companions gathered themselves together and bowed as humans did. Again, do it again. No, Moreland gasped, still laughing. You came nearer killing me than the sound did. I beg mercy. Another night, gentle persons. Our king has had a very long day. We thank you all. Gods, had the entire town seen? Edward stared behind him, but they were all melting away into the dark. That's not what happened, he yelled. You were a hero. They made fun of you. Yes, yes, and yes, especially the last. By Jeffrey himself, that was funny. They all saw that, and you're going to let them do it again? Edward was scandalized. They had all looked ridiculous. Let them. It'll be done all over Tamriel for centuries to come, I doubt not, but never again so well. But it didn't happen like that at all. It would have if the sow had charged again. Something, poor Blade, and she'd seen Moreland leap like a Khajiit. his into a long laugh. Aye, she'd have slain the beast with that look if she couldn't find an arrow. Mats, you're more like the sow than she like herself. Bigger too, I swear. Myth, you old rogue. Only you could look so innocent. But it's not true, Edward protested. Boy, do you think there's only one truth? Was what you saw today truth? Did you see all the truth? Even of what did happen, what you saw here tonight will light up truths unseen if you allow it. You could spend a lifetime reflecting on it and yet not see it whole, for it goes even further and deeper, spreading like ripples in a pool, beyond us all and out into blank. What happens is only a tiny part of the truth, maybe the least part, and what you see is smaller yet. Edward still thought that a king really ought to have more dignity, but he didn't say so.
I can't really say that was worth the wait. Alright, this one is long, so I'm gonna see if the wiki is working now.
Yes. Okay. This is going to be coming off of https://en.uesp.net/wiki/lore:/king_edward, _part_iv. So I'm not going to be moving down the screens on this because that was absolutely painful. This story is way too long. Number two, the fact that you only get to read part of it does not endear it, but I'm committed to reading all the books I find. So, King Edward Part the Fourth. Stories. Edward faced his mother defiantly. I'm not sick and I'm not a baby. I can stay here by myself. I don't need myth. There was a dangerous glint in Morland's eyes. Illyria's lips thinned. You will mind him, Edward. Yes, madam, Edward said sulkily. Come on, wife. Myth knows how to deal with princes that don't want his company. The three adults laughed in their irritating way at a joke that he didn't understand. The weather was drizzly, and Edward had the sniffles. His mother had decided that he shouldn't go out, even though they were only going visiting. Morland had taken his side, but threw out his hands and raised his brows at Edward in a helpless gesture when Illyria insisted that he stay behind. Myth, whom Edward liked the least of the companions, had volunteered to stay with him. Even Sass would have been better. Myth was scruffy-looking, like a stable boy, and cheeky, even for a companion. Edward sulked silently for a while longer. Myth had fetched a broom and was sweeping the house out, brushing dirt from the room above into the room Edward was in. What on earth was the use of staying in when there wasn't really an inn to stay in? Edward got tired of sulking, fetched a broom, and went to help sleep. Myth, Edward said. Have you ever been to the Crystal Tower? I have. It's an unchancy place at first, but you'll grow used to it. Myth was applying his broom with energy and whistling. Sweeping was kind of fun here. There wasn't any sides to the platform, so all you had to do was brush the dirt and the leaves over the side. You started at the top and worked your way down. You're quick with a broom, Myth. I haven't half finished my side yet. Will there be others like me? Oh, some children, I think. Most will be somewhat older. I should be quick with a broom. My father had me sweeping out the king's stables when I was your age. I used to dream and talk too much like you. He beat me for it, so I learned to be quick. Edward swept faster, stirring up dust. Not like that, boy. Watch me. Anyway, there's no hurry. It's just a habit with me. Morland served me my head on a platter if I touched you. My father, he was a hard man to please. He was a Nord. Your father? Edward stared at Myth, but Myth looked much like other dark elves that he'd seen. Not many. Dark elves didn't come to Daggerfall. Gerald had banned them. But he'd seen on some rare trips to other courts. There were some in Firsthold besides Morland and Myth. But did he have red hair? Myth's hair was dark red. Gerald had red hair. He tended the stables for Morland? No wonder Myth looked like a stable boy. But Edward kept his tone polite. Myth had a sharp tongue, and Edward knew that neither of his parents would be sympathetic if he complained that Myth had been impertinent. He did have red hair. Maybe I got mine from him. But mostly mixed elf and human children come out dark elf. No, Morlin wasn't king then, or expecting to be. Besides, this was in Blacklight, where I was born. Morlin's brother was king in Ebonheart in those days. He came up to visit our king and brought Morlin along, to keep him out of trouble, he said. Myth grinned. I grinned when I heard him say that. I saw the boy looking at me out of the tail of his eye, but he wouldn't take notice, like I was dirt or something worse. His brother tossed him a pouch and told him to go into town and get his knife mended, jerked his thumb and told me to show him the way. Morlin said he didn't need an escort to find a store and stalked off like princes do. Myth grinned knowingly at Edward, but the grin wasn't unfriendly. Edward smiled back a bit, and Myth went on. Our king eyeballed me, so I took off after him. Morlin didn't spare me so much as a glance, went 4 blocks out of his way down by the wharfs, and when I tried to tell him where the store was, he shoved me right off the pier. I could levitate, of course, but he caught me by surprise. I have no idea what's going on in this story. But he caught me by surprise, and I went in with a big splash, and everyone laughing like jackasses. I got myself out and went straight to the store and waited for him, but not so that he could see me, and when he finally showed up, I lifted the pouch right off him. He didn't even know that it was gone. So in he goes, tosses a knife on the counter, and tells the smith to fix it right off, which he does. Only then Morlin can't pay him, and tells the smith he's the king of Ebonheart's brother. The smith just laughs and says, I'm the Archmagister. Then the smith calls the guards, and the 3 of them show up. Well, Morlin wasn't what he is now. 3 guards wouldn't even warm him up nowadays. But he was even faster then. He's out of there so fast that he nearly knocked me over at the door. He lost the guards pretty quick. All that armor slows him down. I found him crouching in one of those hedge mazes in the park. He was doubled over out of breath, but I still stood a good ways off while I asked him real nasty if he needed an escort back to the palace. Not that I was planning to go back. I was going to take the money and run and never look back, I tell you. But I had to have the last word. I wasn't born high, but I was born proud. He glared at me for a minute or so, catching his breath. Then he just rolled over and started to laugh that laugh of his. Prince or not, I started to like him then, and when we'd finished laughing, more or less, we started talking. I told him that I didn't want to go back, nor dared to. Princes don't get blamed, Prince, I said. Stable boys do. He said that wasn't entirely the case, but he saw my point. Then he said back that as I was his escort, he must obey his brother and come with me, and that his name was Morlin, not Prince. We've been together ever since, more or less. Edward smiled politely. He could see why Myth had run away, but not why Morlin had gone with him, unless he was afraid to face his brother about the stolen money. Edward tried to imagine Morlin being afraid to face anyone and failed. I wish I was brave like you and Morlin. Why, you are brave, and your courage will grow with the rest of you. Are there only high elf boys at the tower? There'll be other sorts too, most likely. A few dark elves for sure. Do you miss your own kind? Edward shook his head. Human boys don't like me much anyway, nor high elf boys. His eyes filled suddenly, and he turned his head away. But Myth's voice was unexpectedly gentle. I thought you wanted to go to the tower. I do, but you'll be lonely. Edward nodded. That's a hard thing to face. Did you go there alone, Myth? No, Morlin did, but he was older than you by a good bit. A grown man, in fact. They didn't take any but high elf students in those days, you know. But Morlin heard of them and said he wanted to go there. We were together already, the 7 of us, save for Illyria, and a handy bunch in a fight. Morlin had already gotten that dragon's blade he wears, and the dragon's tooth to go with it. Remind me to tell you about that sometime. And he was a famous fighter already, and the rest of us aren't slackers. But he thought we could be better at spellcasting, and the tower was the place to learn that. Well, no one goes near the tower without an invitation. No one. But no one could even tell you where it was. But they'd tell you where not to go to. So he went there alone. One morning he was gone, and there was a note saying for us to wait for him. So we did here in Firsthold. He was gone 2 weeks. Then he came back one night, rowing across with the tide. He said that they'd accepted him, but he couldn't say anything more about it. But he asked me to come back with him. They want me? Well, they've accepted one dark elf, he said. One more shouldn't bother them too much. So we go there, and bless me if the Archmagister himself didn't meet us at the door and demand to know the meaning of this. I wanted to turn myself into a rock. I was wishing hard that I was stable dung, and I figured that I was likely able to. Sorry, and I figured I was like to get my wish soon. But Moreland speaks up real polite that this is his friend he'd mentioned, and that the Archmagister had expressed an interest in his abilities and naturally had wanted to see for himself. But the Archmagister was real interested. So they don't wear armor or carry anything but a staff and a dagger. They think it interferes with their spell casting, all that metal. But Moreland could cast pretty well, even with chain and any one-handed weapon at all. And I would cast wearing leather, and I could cast wearing leather and as much as a saber, though it's an unwieldy weapon. I like my short sword better. Truth, they didn't think that much of me, but Moreland, he'd camped outside their door, and when they tried to move him, he just sat there. They threw all the spells that they had at him, the troll guards, everything. Nothing. He laid out the trolls flat and left them to regenerate. If they tried to beat him with their staffs, he'd ward them off with his blade, and the spells, they didn't turn him a hair. Edward's mouth gaped open. How'd he do that? He said. Well, it was a trick in a way. He'd picked up something that came natural to Willow. See, Willow is different. I didn't know that Willow could cast. Well, she doesn't have any mana ordinarily, but she can absorb it if you cast a spell at her, see? Of course, it wasn't much use to her, since she'd never been able to learn what to do once she got it. Couldn't get it back once it was gone, so she couldn't practice, until Moreland got a hold of her and trained her. Well, Moreland had pretty much figured out how Willow did what she did, though it cost Moreland mana to do what came natural to Willow. So Moreland sat there, absorbing everything that they threw at him, and burning it off into a big shield. Drove him wild. He said the Archmagister could beat him, though. Edward suspected that Myth was making up the whole story. Well, so he did, when he finally came, but the rest of them together couldn't do it, and all Moreland wanted to do was study with them. We were a sight, the two of us dark elves in our battle gear among all that white and gold. I felt like a fish out of water, but Moreland was interested in what they had to say, and you can bet they hung on every word that he said. Not too many words at first. After a fortnight or so, he told me one night to tell the Archmagister that he'd be back in a couple of days. And he shows up with Silk. Of course, he'd been telling them about the Khajiits, and they had been asking questions. The Archmagister's no fool. He just stared at Silk, and she purred real loud and rubbed up against him and asked, "How you doing, Archmagister, baby?" The Archmagister just kind of pushes Silk away and says in a whisper, "How many more?" "Just 2, sir." "What are they?" "Wood elves, sir." "Just wood elves. Plain ordinary wood elves. No horns, hooves, or tails?" "Yes, sir. One of them has an extraordinary absorb ability with some very unusual features. The other's just a bard." "Very well. You may bring the one with the absorb. We don't want the bard. They are not true mages." "Well, that's most generous of you, sir, but the bards are brothers, sir, and I swore to their parents that I wouldn't separate them, so it'll just be the 3 of us." "Her brother. Aye, a pair of twins. You may bring them both." So 3 days later, he's back with the twins, and Sass, and Slave. The Archmagister looks at them and sort of bobs up and down, but he speaks real quiet. "Dark Elf, by a pair of twins, did you mean 2 sets of twins? Are you going to tell me that these are twins?" I could not see that Moreland was kind of sorry that he hadn't thought of trying that, but he said, "No, sir. The twins are Beech and Willow. The Argonian and the Nord are not prospective initiates. They are specimens for your collection. You didn't have any like them, so I thought..." "You thought I do not have a dragon either. Are you going to think to bring me that next?" "Oh, aye, I could. Would you like one?" "Tell me that you're not serious." Well, I couldn't promise, and it would take quite a long time. A year, maybe, but... The Archmagister's eyes rolled up towards heaven. "Thank you, All-Mother. I have at least a year to prepare," he whispered. "I don't think Mats and Sass should be made specimens. They're people, even if they aren't elves. But they made Sass an initiate when they found out that he had some interesting heal spells. But Mats? Mats never minds anything. He hasn't a bit of magic. He couldn't be an initiate. Anyways, he'd have hated it. He spent time gaming with the guards when he wasn't being studied. It seems that he has some interesting magic resistances. Anyway, since then, the initiates aren't just high elves, and they don't all follow the mage way. I shall be just like the Archmagister." "Oh, aye, exactly." Moreland's voice sounded lightly behind him. "I'll cut the ears off a donkey for thee, and dye thy skin with saffron. Bleach thy hair white, and stretch thee a foot." Moreland swung him high. "Art well, son? I told thee so, Illyria. He's not ill at all." "Good, because the Archmagister's return. We go to the tower tomorrow." We was just Moreland and Edward. Illyria had caught Edward's cold and took some pleasure in insisting that she remain in bed. Morlin rowed them across the river in a small boat and waited for most of the day, resting a little at midday. It was evening when they reached the tower, and the setting sun was glinting off of it. Even the sea far below looked red, and there was a hush over the countryside. "It's tall, isn't it?" Edward paused to look. "Towers generally are." "Did you really—" Edward broke off. Questions starting in that fashion did not draw satisfactory answers from the elf. "Has Myth been telling you details?" Morlin has this really weird habit of suddenly switching into thee and thou language, but it's not consistent throughout the story. He's had 10 years to polish that one. I doubt it glistens like the tower. I doubt not it glistens like the tower. He told me how you met, too. I thought he would. I didn't understand why you went off with him. He was a thief and a stable boy, and you were a prince. You've just named 3 excellent reasons, Prince. You never give me serious answers. A serious charge. Very well, then. I saw myself through Myth's eyes and misliked what I saw. A callous bully and a coward, fit to be neither boy, nor man, nor prince. Why did you run off, Prince? Edward hung his head mutely. Nay, I do not require answers. Come, it grows late. Morlin reached his hand for Edward's, but Edward shook him off. If Morlin was a coward, what did that make Edward? He looked at the tower door where Morlin had demanded in one entrance, though all would shut him out. Edward could never do anything like that, but at least he could walk in on his own as an invited guest. King Edward Part the Fifth in the Crystal Tower. Inside the tower, Edward's first impression was of whiteness. Floors, walls, ceilings, all were white and radiated light. Their footsteps made soft crunching noises on the rough floor surface. Except for that, it was very still, with occasional soft, unrecognizable far-off sounds. Morlin moved confidently through the winding halls and long rooms. He seemed very black in all that white. They passed long pools of water with fountains that sparkled in the light. "Where is everyone?" Edward whispered. "At table, I hope. I'm hungry. Aren't you?" "No." Abruptly, a big, broad, ugly shape appeared in front of them and roared a challenge. Edward grabbed for Morlin's arm with both hands. Morlin shook him off, irritably. "God's boy, don't grab my sword arm if ever you spot a monster. Stay clear." Sorry. "God's boy, don't grab my sword arm if you ever do spot a monster. Stay clear." I can't read that properly. But Morlin didn't reach for his blade. He stood still while the monster wrapped its long arms around him and pounded on his back, still roaring. Morlin roared back and pounded on the monster's chest, and he introduced Edward to the captain of the Archmagister's guard. "Don't hug him," Morlin warned the troll, who grinned at Edward, showing pointy teeth. "He'll break." "I thought trolls were dangerous," Edward gasped as they ascended a long, winding stairway. "They are. I'll have bruises for a fortnight if I'll have bruises for a fortnight. I'd have shielded, but I didn't like to hurt his feelings." "He likes you?" "Oh, aye. It can be done, you see." "Why does the Archmagister keep troll guards?" "They keep the rats down." More trolls, but these paid them little heed. Another long stairway, more corridors, a sort of guard room where 3 trolls appeared to be gaming with bones. One of them shambled to his feet and led them down a shadowy passage, a row of cages with huge rats, then some with small, odd creatures that looked rather like elves seen in a badly distorted mirror, though Edward kept this observation to himself. They gobbled and squeaked as the elf and boy paced quickly by. "Goblins," Morlin said with distaste. They turned a corner and went past 2 cages that held only large stone statues. There seemed to be more cages off down the other hallways. The troll unlocked a huge black metal door. It clanged shut behind them. A very large green and yellow hoofed creature sat man-like in one corner. Its unwinking eyes didn't flicker as they passed quickly, and climbed still another stair. More white halls. These were patrolled by huge black dogs that sniffed at them as they passed. Edward stretched his hand to pet one, but it snarled at him. "I wouldn't," Morlin said. "Yes, sir." They came to another massive black metal door. A voice sounded. "What is black and white, has 1 body, 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 red eyes, and 2 brown." That's disgusting, Morlin yelled at the door, hands on his hip. You are correct, mortal. You may pass. The door swung slowly open, creaking. There was no one behind it, just a narrow stairway that wound sharply. It seemed dark above. Morlin raced up the stairs, leaving Edward clinging to the bottom rail, shaking. There was not a thing to do but follow. Welcome, Edward. The Archmagister stood white and gold in the center of a large dim room. Huge windows looked out on the purple twilight sea below. Come here, child. Give me your hands. Edward put his hands in the Archmagister's, who smiled down at him. Edward's fatigue and fear vanished instantly. He smiled back at the Archmagister, who said softly, It is well. You may go, to the furious dark elf who stood glowering to one side. Edward was barely aware of him, his whole attention occupied by the Archmagister. Goodbye, Edward. Bye. Edward didn't take his eyes off the Archmagister. From far away, he heard the dark elf go down the stairs. He calls you son, the Archmagister said. Yes, sir. I asked him if I might call him father. But you're not entirely comfortable about it, Edward sighed. No, sir. That may be as well. You will return to Daggerfall one day, and then you must be Corsair's son. So let the claim be on Morland's side. The Archmagister moved companionably to the windows with him. The dusk was fast gathering as Edward stared out over the hill through which they journeyed. A dark figure appeared below and strode swiftly off into the night. That's Morland. I thought he was going to stay the night. It's dangerous out there alone in the dark. There are evil things out there. Can't you... Dangerous for any evil that meets Morland in his present mood. He will go safely, I promise you. Oh, but I haven't thanked him. He's been very kind, really. Why is he so angry about the door? It was just a silly question. The answer was him and my mother, when they're asleep and I'm not there. How do you make the door talk? Is it an illusion? That's 3 questions. Which of them do you want answered? Aren't you hungry? Would you like a bowl of stew? Sorry, I'm just cleaning something off. Yes, please. And I'd like to hear about the door, please. You think the talking door may prove more comprehensible than the surly dark elf? More interesting? Or safer? The Archmagister's golden eyes regarded the boy thoughtfully. I don't know if I like him. Sometimes I think then other times... Do you understand about liking? He said. He said he didn't. You wouldn't be more comfortable if you felt the same way about him at all times, yet you do not. Yes, that's it exactly. Do you understand? Morland is not a comfortable man. Well, I don't mean that exactly. Sometimes he is like when we rode the dragon. The Archmagister laughed aloud. His laughter reminded Edward of chimes. Yes, I find comfort myself in having Morland near at hand when dragons are about. A young high elf brought in a bowl of stew and set it down on the table. Edward felt a bit disappointed that the stew had come in such an ordinary way, until he remembered that the Archmagister hadn't sent for the stew. The priest at home in Daggerfall said that it was a mark of evil things, that they cannot bear the light, Edward said between mouthfuls. Morland doesn't like sunlight, and he's black. I see. Do you know what evil is? Well, if you do bad things, then you're evil. I see. If the cook had burnt the stew, would he then be evil? Edward grinned. No, just a bad cook. But if he did it on purpose, then I guess he'd have done an evil thing. But maybe he wouldn't be altogether evil. Maybe he was just angry about something. Or perhaps the sort of person who's pleased by spoiling others' pleasure. I guess that'd make my little brothers evil. They sure like to spoil my fun. And you? Edward felt his face redden. I don't take any notice of them, he said quickly. The Archmagister's large golden eyes regarded him steadily. To his own dismay, Edward began to cry. He bawled like a baby. I don't know what's wrong with me, he gasped. I never cry. Really, I don't. Hardly ever. Why ever not? Edward looked up. His tears had blurred his sight, but there seemed to be tears in the Archmagister's face. His hand reached up to feel the wetness. You've been very alone, have you not? The Archmagister said. Yes, until you brought the unicorn for me. I was all alone. They endure no evil. Edward sighed with satisfaction, feeling relaxed and comfortable. The Archmagister was wonderful. We summoned the unicorn, Morland and the dragon and I and others. It's a great magic, and no single man or woman may command. But don't trouble yourself overmuch with judging good and evil. That's a human notion. Life is complex. I know of nothing that is wholly good or wholly evil, not even the unicorn. Edward's time in the tower passed quickly. There were few other novices, and the youngest of these was several years older than Edward. The boy spent several hours each day with the Archmagister. He learned to cast a few spells and to open his mind so that he could renew his magicka quickly while he slept. But often they just talked. Sometimes Edward was given a book to read. Other times he was allowed to choose from one of the thousands in the library. He usually tired of them quickly. He didn't read Elvish script easily. His tutor had taught him the letters, but their few books were in Bretic. Spellcasting was more fun. Fire spells came easily to him, and he learned to shield himself readily. But to his chagrin, he couldn't heal at all. He invariably made things worse for the unlucky rats that he was allowed to practice on. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, Edward cried out in frustration. He sent a dart of fire at the writhing rat, and it turned into a charred corpse. Edward, it will be well if you let the heal spells wait a while yet. Morland said light heal is the first spell anybody learns, Edward said sulkily. Did he? Well, he's a practitioner of magic, not a theorist. Even I would hesitate to say what a Breton might or might not learn, and when he might learn it. You are the first of your people with whom I have worked. Certainly Morland has no experience with your race, except for your mother, of course. My mother can't do magic. No, but we think the ability lies within her. She has not been able to learn to master it, probably because she was too old when she first tried. If you want my opinion, it is your thoughts and not your hands which are causing your difficulty. Weeping might help. I don't feel like crying, Edward said rather sullenly. He felt more like kicking something, although incinerating the rat had helped relieve some of that. Meditation might help then. King Edward Part 6. Training. I'm going to get some water first. The day Edward was to leave, the Archmagister Oh god, it's another one of these ones. And it's a long one. The day Edward was to leave, the Archmagister summoned him, presented him with a mithril staff, and bade him farewell. It was back in his cell, Edward... Sorry. Back in his cell, Edward removed the novitiate robe and donned the grey shirt, black pants, and red sash he'd worn to the tower. He fingered the sash lovingly. His mother had purchased the shirt and pants, saying that they looked sturdy and maybe wouldn't show the dirt from the journey. Morland had given him the silk sash with its embroidery of twinned leaves and flowers, birds and butterflies, in mithril, dwarven, and elvic metallic threads. But he'd waited until they had crossed the channel. Illyria had said that it cost too dear. She'd suggested cutting down one of Morland's old ones to fit, but the elf had adamantly refused to let her have any of them. Edward smiled, remembering, and wrapped the sash twice around his waist and then knotted the ends carefully. He took the staff and ran down to meet his parents. He'd meant to fling himself at them, but Morland was alone, and Edward stopped still. Where's my mother? Is she... She wanted to stay and choose a horse for you. Didn't trust it to beach. A horse? For me? Really? Of course. You can't walk all the way to Morrowind. I thought I'd have to ride behind someone. Look, the Archmagister gave me a staff. Isn't it beautiful? The elf took it and hefted it, trying a few swings and feints. Good balance and weight for thee, I think. Light for me. Show me how you use it. Suppose I attack you. He used his bare hands, and Edward fell into a defensive position, blocked him, and thrust the staff towards Morland's ribs. He danced easily aside, but praised the boy. A mage should have a dagger, too. I thought you might like to have Tooth here. Edward's eye popped. Tooth had an ebony blade and a hilt made from Real's dragon's tooth. The elf slid it from his sheath and handed it to Edward, who took it carefully. The blade had a wicked point, and the edge was sharp enough to shave with. Mats borrowed it some time. He'd carved the hilt, too. Are you sure that Mats doesn't mind? Quite sure. Morland unbuckled his belt and slid the sheath off it. There was a new belt for Edward of snakeskin, soft and pliable, with and a buckle with a black rose of Morrowind on it, just like Morland's. It's from the companions. He knelt to fit the belt and dagger and the sash over it properly, and Edward threw his arms around his neck. "It's wonderful. I do thank thee, and them too. Oh, I've missed all of thee so much. We missed you too, son. Let's go, or we'll miss our tide." "I wouldn't want to worry Mother," he said, trying to sound casual about having a mother that would worry about him. "No fear. I told her not to look for us until tomorrow night, just in case. But we'll surprise her." "Good thinking." They made good speed and reached the inlet before the tide was full. "Shall I show you how to use Tooth, or would you rather rest?" "Tooth? I can rest in the boat while you work." Moreland shielded himself, and Edward too, saying that Tooth's bite was no joke. "I could have shielded myself," Edward said proudly. "I'm good at that, but my heels go all wrong." "It'll come. Give it time." Evidently Tooth wanted time too. Try as he might, he couldn't get near the elf with the blade, though Moreland kept his feet planted and simply swerved his body, ducking and weaving, and laughing. Frustrated, Edward sheathed Tooth and picked up the staff and whacked at him, swinging it with both hands. It wasn't doing any harm, but it made satisfying sounds as it thwacked against the spell shield. Moreland let him hit, but stopped the staff easily with when the spell had been used up. Edward threw it on the ground and turned away. The elf reached for him in consolation. Edward snatched Tooth from its sheath and thrust it straight at the elf's heart. The blade was knocked spinning from his hand. Edward had braced to stop the thrust and hold it, and he felt the shock even through the shield. Then Moreland was kneeling before him, nursing his left hand across his right knee, his face gray with shock and disbelief. Blood was gushing from his wrist like a fountain. "Give me thy sash." I didn't... Edward's teeth were rattling in his head. He felt sick and dizzy, bile washed up in his mouth. "It didn't mean..." So much blood. "Boy, don't faint now. I need thy aid. The sash. Now, Edward. Pack it into the wound. Gods, what a mess." The hand was half severed at the wrist. Edward sat down abruptly, shaking all over, but his hands packed the sash with the open wound, and then he wrapped the rest around his hand and wrist. "Take my sash and make a sling." Moreland eased the injured limb into the sling, and then released the other hand. He took the water bottle from his belt and drank it down. "I need more water. Where's thy theft?" "Well, there's a well 2 miles back. Where's Tooth? Go find it, and don't cut yourself on it." "I don't want it." "Not many blades have bathed in Moreland's blood. 'Twill bring you luck. Do as I say." "The tide's in." "Aye, and first hold. It could be on Joan, for all the good it does us. I can't row one-handed." "I could..." No, you cannot. You haven't the strength. The current's swift here. I prefer to die on land. Edward, we cannot stay here. The blood smell will draw beasts. If I faint, get well away and climb a tree, and pray." He climbed to his feet and leaned on his staff, breathing hard. "Stay close, but don't grab at me, no matter what happens." He took a small step, and then another. "I'm sorry." "Doubtless. You picked a poor time and place to turn assassin. A good assassin always has an escape planned." "Yes, sir." Edward sniffed back his tears. "Sir, I cannot heal you, but I can restore some vigor." "Can you? 'Twould be of great help." The spell Edward cast shook the elf. He gasped, but stood straighter and firmer after the shock wore off. "I could do it again," Edward offered eagerly. "Nay, you have plenty of power, but want finesse. But 'tis much better now." Moreland was walking better. He sounded better, too. Edward tried to blot the picture of the injury from his mind. They moved slowly, Moreland leaning against a tree from time to time. Nothing molested them, but after an interminable time of silent traveling, they reached the old well. Moreland drained the first bottle, and Edward refilled it, drank himself, and filled it yet again. "We'll spend the night in there." There was a large ramshackle building, apparently deserted. The elf kicked the locked door open. Inside, it was pitch dark. "Light?" Edward offered. "Nay, I can see. Save your power and stay with me." There was a skittering noise. "Rats!" Edward shielded the mouth without thinking, pulled Tooth out, and placed his back to the elf's. A rat leaped and dove itself onto the blade. Moreland swung the staff and laid out 2 more. Others scurried off. "Well done, lad." They found a small windowless room and shut the door behind them. There seemed to be some wood about. Probably it had been some sort of storage room off the kitchen. Moreland sat down against the wall. "So, you can use the knife. Was all that pretense, to put me off my guard?" Edward was appalled. He burst into tears, protesting that he'd never harm Moreland willingly. "I meant it for jest. I thought it'd make you laugh. I was angry at first, but at myself, my clumsiness, not you. It was a sudden thought. I love you, dear." The elf reached out with his good arm, pulled Edward down to him. That's worth a hand then, any day. Edward sobbed against the shoulder, while Morlin soothed him with pats. You are my real father. Edward, I am not. Nay, thou art. Thee puts my well-being ahead of thine, and loves me when I least deserve it. Thee's been kind and generous, and never asked anything to save my own profit. Thee'd give thy... Sorry, this is really hard to read sometimes. They'd give thy very life for mine. That's what real fathers do. And I've given thee naught but pain. He who sired me despises me and my mother because we are unlike him. We are not like you either, and yet you love us well. I will do better by you, dear father. I gave thee enough cause for offense. I took thy mother from thee. You risked losing her because you would not part me from my father. You did not know me, and my father was your bitter enemy, and yet you took thought for us. You cannot know how unnatural he is. It isn't in you. Granted, and yet the offense and your anger at it remain. I love you, Edward protested, but he heard an angry edge in his voice. And hate me. Morland's voice was so calm and quiet that they might have been discussing the weather. I can't do both, can I? Can you? I didn't mean to hurt you. I believe you. Am I evil? I was sorry. I'd give anything if it hadn't happened, but I took some measure of satisfaction in it. Edward's throat choked with sobs. He couldn't speak, but nodded into Morland's shoulder. The elf's hand stroked him gently. Did Eric tell you of the Daedra? The demons? No. Is it a demon that makes me do such things? I am evil, then. No, you are not. But the Daedra feed on actions such as that. They encourage them, and your anger draws them. They can't make you do anything. But they can't make you do anything. Or it's not inside you, but it is connected to you. I don't want it. I want it to go away. How can I make it go away? Why don't you want it? You draw power from it. That's what let you shield us both. With the rats attacked? Mana? That doesn't come from demons. No, but the ability to use it can. Look, some of your deeds feed the Daedra, but you draw power from it at the same time. Then the power's yours to use as you choose. Do you have a Daedra? I do, and it's a big one too. But I think everyone has one or more. Some are stronger than others. That's all. But don't go around asking after them. It's not polite. I want mine to go away, Edward wailed. So you say, but pretending it isn't there will not accomplish that. Having a Daedra is a bit like riding a horse. You must keep control. The Daedra do not care for you, and it would be as lief feed off your pain or injury or death as any other, and they find a new host. They do not think or plan as we can, and I do not think they experience time as we do. So acts that feed the Daedra take place in the moment, and while you are caught up in them, past and future cease to exist for you too. It is an intensely pleasurable experience, but it can also be very dangerous and very addictive. So that you begin to think of only feeding your Daedra. You cease to think of the gods and those you love, even yourself, and when you have walked too far along the path, then you lose the will to choose another. How terrible! What must I do then? It is terrible, the worst that can befall a person. Remember this night, how you felt. Learn to recognize the Daedra's hunger for what it is, and think about what you do. You are young, and this is heavy for you, but you are at risk. Ah! The elf's body stiffened, and he caught his breath. Edward guessed that the wound was paining him. Morland said that he must sleep a bit, and could Edward keep watch and wake him in an hour's time. Then he could set a lock on the door, and they could both rest. Aye, sir, and I might do somewhat more. I cannot set a lock, but the door would not latch, nor would it stay open, but it would swing nearly shut. Edward felt about near the wall, and behind it, and found a wedge. He shut the door and drove the wedge at home with a chunk of wood. I thought so. 'Tis awkward to pass such a door with both arms full of wood, and we have such in Gerald's palace. Now anything trying to come in will rouse you. You can use your power to cast heal instead of lock. Why, well thought of indeed. He freed his blade and laid it on the floor beside him. We may as well both sleep then. They slept fitfully. There were often scrabblings at the door and the walls, but nothing entered their small closet. Morland cast heal several times during the night. By morning he pronounced himself as fit as a one-handed man can be. He unwrapped the sash bandage and inspected the wound. The bleeding was stopped. The hand was still warm to the touch, and it no longer hurt him, nor was it swollen and discolored. but the wound was still open and the hand useless. Nerves and muscles had been severed and some of the small bones broken. Such repair was beyond his skill. Edward, feeling the Daedra feed on the sight, turned quickly away. Morlin grinned. You may as well let it feed. It's a harmless sort of feeding. The damage is done. I mean to starve it, Edward said firmly. You can try and do that, or you can try and learn to control it instead, and still walk with the gods. I think we'd best go to the tower. Aye, and they'll be able to heal you there, will they not? I know not. At least they'll be able to attach it more firmly than it is at present. Oh, do not look so downcast. The skill to mend is somewhere, if not the tower. Sass is good with battle injuries, and there are temples that know more of the healing arts than the tower mages. Besides, it's only my left hand. He held up the wadded sash, stiff with his dried blood. The color's more practical than thy mother thought. Let's see if we can wash it out a bit. Never have I come so ill-equipped on a journey. I might as well have been strolling down the main street of Ebonheart. My mother will kill me. Right after she kills me, Edward sighed. At least returning to the tower will delay that. They came out into the bright courtyard. The morning sun was already high in the western sky. Not so, Edward. The companions are coming now. I hear them. Mara, let me think of a real good lie. Myth trotted into the courtyard. Here they are, they called back to the others. By Torgo, you are injured. Let me see that. We thought to row across to meet you, and we saw the blood on the shore and tracked you here. What attacked you? A demon. A demon? What? In the open like that in daylight? Gods, what was it carrying? An ebony dye katana? Myth whistled as he inspected the injury. Illyria and the others ran up. She hugged Edward. Are you all right, darling? I was worried, then paled as she saw her husband's hand. You must be slowing down. How'd you let a demon do that to you? Myth demanded. It was the boy. He grabbed my arm in fright, and my shield spell failed. It wasn't his fault. It was an accident. Ali, don't look at it. Edward, why don't you take thy mother to see the rat you killed? I want to watch Sass, Edward objected, then remembered that it would feed his Daedra, but he might learn something about healing if he watched, which would be a good thing. This is going to be more complicated than he thought. Oh, Edward, Illyria said, you must keep clear in a fight. He killed a rat in the old inn thereafter. Did right well. Kept his head, put his back to mine, shielded us both. Anyone's apt to panic in the first fight, especially if he isn't expecting it. Sass came up as last as usual, elbowed the others aside, and inspected the injuring Hissy. I can fix this. It's clean. He looked it over carefully, bending the hand back to open the wound, and then he brought his hand forward so that the edges of the tissue met. He was very particular about getting it aligned just so. Then he had Bats hold it in place while he cast spells over it. All outer traces of the injury had vanished, leaving not even a scar. Morlin swung it with satisfaction, twitching his fingers. Thanks, Sass. It's stiff, but tomorrow I finish. My poor baby, Illyria fussed over Edward. You must have been so frightened. And you spent the whole night in this awful house? I am not a baby. I wasn't afraid. My father was here. Or was there.
I'm debating on whether or not we should keep reading. I think I'm going to leave it at part 7 for now. This one I am going to need to use the teleport cheat. because I didn't solve the. I didn't solve the puzzle to get through the different doors. Well, at least get a little fighting in, though. Jesus Christ. Alright, let's just get to the objective and get out of here. I don't normally pick up the items when I teleport, but at this point I'm purely taking advantage of this. I know there's like a shield or something like that that I can cast, but let's see how many times I can run into the... got 99 problems, but the Lich ain't one.
You've succeeded in a most dangerous enterprise, Caius, but many more such trials await you. By bringing the horn to me, you have helped me lift the curse of the Queen Dowager placed on my tower. I hope that I can count on you for further aid. For now, take these greaves as your reward.
I don't think I can wear them. Oh, those would be great. Yeah, and this whole thing is reset, so... Now, of course, this raises the more practical question, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to do now. So I'm just gonna queue up the next King Edward just so I know where I'm at. Alright, I'm slightly inclined to go back to Daggerfall. Although there were a couple of dungeons that I wanted to check out as well. It's Frostfall, so I gotta see. I wrote down a bunch of Alright. I still have a bit of time before one of the Daedra summonings. Or what I think will be a Daedra summoning. Alright, I think in this case I'm going to explore the ruins. The drawback here is that I'm actually carrying a lot of gold. So, in terms of encumbrance, there's not a lot that I can actually. That's the problem. I have to deposit it in the bank if I'm gonna. So there's a couple of things I want to do. One, I want to deposit all of my gold. Sell off what I can. Actually, I should do that at the general market. And then I'll do some training at the Mages Guild, and we'll decide where we go from there. Why am I not? I think that explains why a couple of those spells weren't working. Okay, I have to identify that before I sell it, so... Apparently I can't count.
Not bad, not bad. I'd give most people less, but for you, 3,301 gold. That's my absolute best offer.
As always, we'll just take a quick peek to see if there's anything interesting. Alright, so the obvious next step is the bank so that we can deposit everything. Actually, a slightly better choice would be to go to the alchemist to sell everything. So even 2,000 I think is actually going to be more than I need. Look at that encumbrance. Alright, so in this case I am going to go north. Just to sell off more of what I have, and then we'll do some training at the Mages Guild. And then after that I think I'm going to try and do some treasure hunting back on that island. It would be good if I could do some things to make my restoration go up. But obviously just adventuring is going to be the best way for that to happen.
Enough of this endless dickering. You are obviously in great need. Normally, I would pay far less, but for you, I will offer 2,213 gold.
So this money should last me for a training identification of some of the goods. And obviously the journey back to the Isle. Also, seeing as I am probably going to try Daedra summoning, I should figure out how much it costs.
Incense and soft music soothe your nerves as you cross the threshold. Each item in this shop has been carefully mounted and displayed. Not the slightest defect can be detected on any item within. Congratulations, Wizard Caius. The Council and the Archmagister just voted to award you with a new rank today.
Excellent. I should figure out what that gives me. I'm just going to take a quick look and look at the bonuses. That's level 7. So I need 8 more points to get to the next level, and then 8 more points after that, it looks like. And before I go too far,
You and the trainer practice for 3 hours. The trainer tells you to reflect on what you've learned and to see if you can put it to good use. That'll be 546 gold pieces. You've bartered me down to that.
And I'm actually still sitting on about 2,000 gold, so... the encumbrance is not that bad. Oh, right, I said I was going to see if Daedra summoning would work. So I don't actually gain access to teleportation until one more level.
We're not summoning this day. It might be worthwhile to use your time to check in at the library at the guild. There are a number of books about Daedric summonings, including the dates appropriate for summoning.
Alright, so it doesn't tell me what it'll cost. Who's this guy I'm with?
Your vision hazes and the world grows dim. Out of the gray, a woman's face appears. Medora. Caius, your efforts to free me have not been in vain. I have discovered a power that will soothe the ghost of my beloved Lysandus. However, it is in the hands of Gortwog, warlord of the Orcs, in the steel citadel of Orsinium. Go to him in Orsinium and see if there is anything that can be done to persuade him to give it to you. Bring the powder to me in Direni Tower once you have it. The vision clears. Sometimes you wish sorceresses would just send letters like other people do.
Alright. I'm still gonna loot this. So the important thing to remember on this place is that it's not clear that there's anything special for me to get here. This is just purely looting. But it's the first time that I've actually tried to follow one of these treasure maps. Surprise! So obviously, if I can, I'll try to go to Gortwalk. But seeing as I just got the quest right around the time I was going to try out one of these more treasure-oriented quests, I'll at least get this one done first. I just want to double check that I actually did this right, because this might be a somewhat decent dungeon in the sense that I don't have to do this big winding path. Or, well, it's a big winding path, but like, I don't need to do, I don't need to do this labyrinth. Before I take the elevator, I'm gonna go turn in a bunch of the loot that I found. That particular book, I believe we can sell. So apparently the Daedra Seducers are supposed to hit really hard because my vision always keeps bouncing all over the place. But they don't actually seem to be doing any damage. Let me up. Cool. Okay, now this is purely for my curiosity, but I actually want to see if there's any particularly special items inside of here. I'm gonna reload immediately after that. But I kind of want to see. At this point, I really just want to see if there's supposed to be some special item that I get from these places, or if it is just, here's a new location for you to mess around with. So it's just loot, which is fine because I like loot. But if I get tired of it, I'm just gonna go away. Cool. I already have much better weapons in the blade category, but it's the one worry that I have is once I get to Orsanium, I'm I can loot with. Nice. Again, I'm running into that age-old problem of people using spells to kill me, giving me extra mana, and as a result not needing to worry about resting and getting my skills up. But it does also potentially save me some time because it's not obvious if there's a limit on the proscenium quest. There's a very reasonable question based on this character model as to where exactly those plain robes were stored. Again, similar story as I was saying before. I'm not looking to pick this place clean. I'm looking to sort of fill my pockets and go back to the entrance if I can. Okay, perfect opportunity, especially because that gave me enough magicka to return to the entrance without having to rest.
Medora came to me in a vision and told me that Lysandus' ghost could be soothed if I can convince Gortwog, Lord of Orcs, in Orsinium to tell me where it is.
Yep, they want to murder me. I always know how to make a good impression.
So Medora wants the dust of restful death. Only because I respect the memory of King Lysandus will I do this. The dust can be found in the ruins of old Biladin's place on her own island. Tell Medora that the price is her support of my claim to the heart. She'll know what that means.
Alright, well that was straightforward. So I'm not sure if I can do anything with these locations. Yeah, so they're residences, but it's not clear what purpose they serve. They did say her island. I also want to be a little careful because I know I've got a Daedra summoning. I don't think we can make the 20th of Evening Star, but the first seed one I think comes up pretty quick. Seems like a good place to end, although it's a little early. Actually, I guess the one thing I can do is finish the last story for King Edward.
King Edward Part the 7th. It's Chapter 7, Dragon. So you saw a demon and killed a rat with tooth. That's a fine ebony dagger, tooth is. They're rare, so you'll want to take real good care of it, Myth said. I can't tell you about the blade except that it came from Morland's father. It's the one his brother sent him to repair just before we ran away. Would you like to hear about how they got the dragon's tooth that Matt's carved the hilt from? Edward nodded, caressing the curved hilt with its lightly carved intertwined roses, thorns and leaves. It was well after supper, and everyone but him and Myth had left the fire for one reason or another. Illyria and Morlin had gone for a walk hand in hand, Illyria holding Morlin's newly healed left hand in both of hers. They'd laughed and shaken their heads when he'd offered to come along. Not tonight, Illyria had said. Go to sleep soon. We'll be leaving before dawn. Willow had gone to visit a high elf friend. Beach, Sass, and Mats, and the Khajiit woman Silk had also gone off together, laughing. They'd invited Myth to come along, but Myth had declined. Khajiits. They're all turning into a bunch of shameless Khajiits, Myth said. The short dark elf sat close to the glowing embers, knees to his chest. His hair and eyes glowed in the dim light. If you're going to pair, you should pair, not turn it into a tourney. They'll all be selling tickets next, but to each his own. Khajiits think that we're weird because we like eating as a group. Silk says it put her right off her food at first, listening to everyone chew, while having a bunch of watchers puts me off. I suppose you're too young for this kind of talk. Edward shrugged. It was a beautiful night. Crisply cool, no moon, but the stars were very large and bright. Anyway, it was just a few months after Mats had joined up with us. We were in Skyrim, traveling from town to town. Just 3 kids seeing the country a bit, picking up odd jobs where we could. Morlin entered tournaments if we heard about them, but he wasn't winning that much. Just about enough to cover healing him up afterwards. You can get beat up...
I'm going straight to the webpage from now on.
You can get beat up pretty bad fighting Skyrim style. That's without shielding spells, or any other spells for that matter. No magic allowed, even if it isn't to the death. And he drew a few types that didn't mind seeing a little dark elf blood spilled in the sand, or a lot, and the crowds were against him at first. It can get pretty lonely in the arena, especially if you're beating up with the hometown favorites, and it's worse if he's beating you. Mats and me'd be the only ones for him, and sometimes we didn't dare cheer too loud. They'd look real funny at a Nord boy cheering a dark elf back then. Of course, Mats was so big that not many wanted to start anything with him. That was a long time ago. Morlin's the favorite now if things get tough. Of course, the crowds will cheer for a good match, but hardly anyone really wants to see him lose now. They like seeing the best, even if it comes wrapped in a dark elf hide. And when he walks into arena, you know you're seeing the best. Not but what they'd like seeing a Nord that's better. And Mats may get there soon. He doesn't fight his best against Morlin, though. Maybe he doesn't want to, or maybe Morlin just knows him too well. Oh well, you want to hear about the dragon. So Morlin was gambling with this Nord in the tavern one night, trying to pick up a little easy gold. The pot's pretty big, and the man can't match his bet. So he says he'll put up this map on the pile and tap Morlin. Says it's a map to the hiding place of the best blade ever made. Says there's a spell on it, so that if you hit your opponent, you get as much heal as he gets hurt. That some mage hit it just before he died, so only someone who's worthy of it can get to it. And you think I look worthy? Morlin says, grinning. We were young and dumb, but not all that dumb. The Nord grins back and says, I saw you fight in Falkreath, kid. You look like you'd take a chance. Why not? The story alone is worth the gold. You ought to be a bard. So anyways, Morlin wins the pot and tosses the man enough to keep his throat wet all evening. Just for laughs, we look at the map. It showed the Dragon's Teeth Mountains down in Hammerfell. Real wild country, and there's an X at some writing saying Fang Lair. Mats gets excited and says he's heard of the place, but he'd never known just where it was. And you still don't, I say. Any fool can draw a map, just as any fool can look at one. I could do as much myself. Matt says Fang Lair is an old dwarf mine, but there's supposed to be a dragon in there now, and the dwarves are all gone. Morlin looks real interested at the mention of mine, and asks what they mine there. Matt says mithril and gold. Morlin says, The mithril had him interested. We couldn't really afford good weapons, and mithril's scarce, but it's light to carry for its worth, and it's easy to mine if you know how, and he did. He didn't believe in the magic blade or the dragon, but he thought the mine might be real. Mining's in his blood, as it is in all of the Rathim, the royal kin of Ebonheart. It took us a couple of months to get there. We couldn't afford horses. We never would have found it without the map. It's tricky country, full of canyons and hidden valleys. We sure never expected what we saw when we did get there. You could see the towers from the canyon mouth way back in there. Dark elves live right in the caverns if they mine, but the dwarves had built a hall over top of the mines. It's a pretty thing on the outside. Narrowed towers, arched bridges between them, delicate looking. You wouldn't expect work like that from dwarves. Merged right into the rocks too, and there's a big stone dragon mounted above the gate. "There's your dragon, Mats," I said. The inside wasn't much to look at, just a rock wall. The doorway was enormous, but the doors were gone. There was a balcony running right around a big open pit, probably the start of the mine, turned into a hall. And right in the middle was more treasure than you can imagine, piled up almost like a haystack that had been flattened out. And what had flattened it was a golden dragon curled right over it. We didn't even see him at first because he blended in with the rest of the gold. Well, we just froze in place. We hadn't seen the sign of a live dragon outside. The place smelled of brimstone, but most mines do. And there the dragon was, just laying there. It's got to be 2 miles to any kind of shelter. "I told you there was a dragon," Mats whispers. "Shh," Morlin says. "Look at what's in front of his nose." I've been busy looking at his nose, believe you me, but there was a sword lying there, naked sure enough, and the blade was dark metal that looked just like his dagger. "You two start back," Morlin says. "I'm going to try for that blade anyway. If that's not ebony, I'm a wood elf. Maybe the dragon's dead or asleep for the winter. Maybe it's not alive at all, just something that the dwarves made to guard their treasure, like the scarecrows the Nord farmers put in the grain fields. At worst, I'll distract them long enough for you two to get clear." I don't mind to take him up on it, but Mats just shook his head, and I was kind of ashamed to go back alone. "Let's just all clear out," I said. "That thing looks real enough to scare me away." But Morlin cast invisibility and heads down the stairs, not making a sound that even I could hear. I could see Mats letting him go down alone, but I could see that Mats hated letting him go down alone, but Mats couldn't sneak past a blind, deaf beggar in a fish market. So we strung our bows and figured that we could try to get off a couple of shots and maybe get lucky and take out the eyes if the dragon woke up and went for Morlin. Mats and I move along where we can get into a tower stair fast if we have to, figuring that the dragon can't get in there. Then we scrunch down and peer between the railings. Not that there was anything to see except the dragon lying there, which is really a lot to see at that. Then those dragon eyes popped open and my heart gave one big jump and then seemed to quit entirely. "Ah, dinner comes to me today," the dragon says. "Take a good look at my hoard, Dark Elf. You will not steal it, nor view it long, but your bones will keep it company forever." "I don't want your hoard, dragon, just the sword that you guard. I'll trade you mine for it. Mine's bigger." I couldn't see Morlin, but his voice was coming from right near where the sword was, which was practically in the dragon's mouth. "I get a meal in both swords. Why should I just settle for your poor sword? Let me pass, and I'll get you more gold from below." "I have gold enough," the dragon yawned, and I thought it was going to swallow Morlin right then, but he turned his head away from us too. Mats was looking to get a shot, but it was really dark there for Nord eyes, and he was scared of hitting Morlin, since he couldn't locate him that well by sound. Of course, Morlin's too smart to get between us and the dragon, but Mats wasn't smart enough to think that far along. Slavery dulls the wits in some ways, Mats says, and he hasn't been free very long. I could see well enough, and I could tell by sound exactly where Morlin was, but the shot was clean out of my range. The dragon goes on, "But there is something you can do for me, elf, to prolong your life just a few more minutes." "A few more minutes sounds pretty good just now, dragon. What would you ask of me?" Morlin's voice sounded calm and easy, as if he was asking if there would be rain tomorrow. He can keep his head in a tight spot, I'll give him that. "I have a toothache. It's too far back for me to reach it with my claws." "Can see it, elf." The dragon gapes his jaws to bare his teeth. Morlin's invisibility spell wore off about then, and I could see him standing there, staring up into the cavern of the mouth. "Lower your head a bit, so I can get a good look." He puts out his hand and pulls the upper lip aside, cool as you please, and examines the inner gum carefully. Damnedest thing I ever saw. "It's abscessed. The gum wants lancing, and the tooth should come out. I can lance it, if you trust me in there with a sword." "And why should I trust you, Dark Elf? I hear no good of your kind." "You must be spending too much time with Nords, then. I wouldn't be able to kill you before you killed me. Why should I even try? Listen, I have some friends up above. Suppose they hunt you a nice fat deer. I'll lance your gum, and you can let me go and eat the deer. Else you can just eat me now, toothache and all." "What makes you think your friends will return once they're away?" "They're not very smart. I think for them. They'd be lost without me. Good hunting, guys. If they can't find a deer, is there anything else you'd like? Pig, maybe? A few rabbits? Nuts? Berries? Hurry up, will you? But we had hand signals, and his hand said, "Get out of there and stay out." I'd been glad to. I'd been fond. I mean, I'm fond of Morlin, but I didn't see my dying alongside would bring him any comfort. I'd have been glad to see him clear if it was me that was on the menu. I figured he felt the same way, but that thick-skulled Nor wouldn't listen to me. Said if dying beside him was all we could do, then that's what we'd do. Nord nonsense. Sounds good in a song, though. So we took a couple of hours getting the deer and headed back with it. I figured Morlin was filling the dragon's belly by now, and the dragon would be happy to add a deer, another dark elf, and a Nord to round out the day's rations. But Morlin was still sitting there chatting with the dragon. He didn't look pleased to see us either. Told us to leave the deer and go, and he'd lance the abscess once we're away. But Matt says he'd been thinking. Oh, brother, I thought. Matt doesn't think too often, and that's a good thing, really. He's decided that he can get a chain round that bad tooth, fastened down to the end of the floor, and then the dragon can give it a good yank himself. The dragon likes the idea, so Morlin lances that abscess to take the swelling down to where the dragon can culp the deer with some comfort, and then they rig a big chain and get that tooth out. Made a hell of a mess, blood and pus everywhere, and Morlin's got us casting heal spells on this dragon to stop the bleeding and to close up the wound. Very good, very good. All right, Morlin, you've proven yourself. Take the sword and go. Morlin looks at him. You mean this was some kind of test? He says. How long have you had that toothache? Long indeed, as you measure time, mortal, yet not very long for dragonkind. Hear my story, then. A scraggly young mage came along, hoping to steal my gold. I caught him at it, and we had increasingly harsh words. And he attempted a spell aimed at me. His pitiful spell affected me little, and I killed him, but... The dragon looked away briefly, then resumed his tale. The little runt had apparently cast a homemade curse spell upon himself, when I crunched him. The dragon scowled fiercely, remembering, then continued. Anyway, the ache only became bad when someone came along to try for the sword. The sharpest pain went away if I ate the intruder. But I usually didn't, though I've singed a few in self-defense. I waffed a bit of fire, and most of them fled. Deer are plentiful. There's something unpleasant about eating someone that you've talked to. That greasy mage gave me indigestion for days, cramps and runny bowels, and too much gas, even for a dragon. So that toothache never did completely go away, and people who've come along haven't been very pleasant either. All in all, one of the most unpleasant stretches in my life. I couldn't stay away from the vicinity of the sword for very long, of course, part of the curse. We could stay on for a while if you like. We're good company. I'm Morlin, and my red-headed friend is Myth, and the big guy is Mats. I'd still like to look for Mithril below. I've never had a dragon friend before. I might like that. You have good friends, and though you said that you must do the thinking for them, I think that they can do some thinking of their own, and it would appear that they have decided that you are a worthwhile fellow. The dragon hesitated for a second and actually managed to look shy. You can call me Akatosh. So we stayed for a couple of weeks, hunted with the dragon. Now that's an experience. Searched the mines, didn't find much down there, but the dragon gave us the jewels from his hoard. Said he only needed the metal. They absorb it into their scales while they lie on it. So we did pretty well out of it after all. Morlin tried to give Mats the sword, claimed that he'd have sure tried to kill the dragon if we hadn't come back, and would have been toasted. But Mats wouldn't take it. Said the dragon gave it to Morlin, so that was clearly who was supposed to get it. Mats took the tooth, but he made the hilt that you've got now and gave Morlin that too. Told me he'd never had anything worth giving before, and it made him feel good. He's really pleased that Morlin chose to give it to you. I think Mats should have got the sword, Edward said. He didn't try to steal anything. It was really brave of him to come back, and when he didn't, even when he didn't think it would do any good. Morlin tried to steal, got caught, and then just tried to talk his way out of it. You all could have been killed because of him. That's what Morlin said. Oh well, Mats likes that big axe of his better than a blade anyway. Edward sighed. I wish I was brave like Mats. I guess I'm more like you. Aye, Morlin's voice sounded behind him, startling the boy. Tart tongue like Myth. No matter. I'll be well pleased if you're as brave as Myth. And once I'm gone, they say no more of me than he did what he had to do. My spirit... And if once I'm gone, they say no more of me than he did what he had to do, my spirit will be at peace.
could read that other entry, but I think now seems like a good time to end it. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next week.